Hi everyone, so it has been a few days now since I dinked level 100. I guess a lot of you guys have seen the clip and maybe have followed the race on Twitch and all that. We had a lot of people there, a lot of support. I want to say, first of all, a big thank you to everyone who tuned in and who gifted subs or all that kind of stuff. Thank you very much. It has been quite a blast for me. And now I want to take the opportunity to just talk about the story of this race to world first and all that, and give a bit of background. So you might have seen this on Twitch that I was playing solo hardcore Rogue. The reason why I played Rogue is because 3 years ago or so, Blizzard made the Rogue announcement trailer, and I knew from that moment that it's going to be my main class, and it was decided. So my fate was sealed in that moment, and I just would go with it no matter what. But I knew that Diablo 4's release would be probably one of the biggest opportunities of my career, of my life as a content creator. So I figured I should try to make the most out of it. And, well, what better way to do that than like a nice world first race on hardcore. After I had played Diablo 3 for so many years and made all those guides and all those rank 1s and all that good stuff, I figured that I would probably have a really good shot at trying something like this. So I started preparing for it. What this means is that I started soaking up all the possible information there is about Diablo 4, about those blog posts. I started thinking about how the game is going to be. I started thinking about how I can actually achieve such a feat. So I started keeping a really close eye on the developments. I was trying to figure out how everything works, how the skill systems work, how the item system work, and all this stuff, even without actually playing the game, without having access to the game. And even though I knew that a lot of these things would actually change, it was more about understanding the overall picture of what Blizzard is actually trying to accomplish with the game. It also meant that I had to start training myself for insane streaming marathons, and I also had to get into the mindset of playing hardcore, and playing hardcore in a very different way than we are used to from Diablo 3, for example. In Diablo 3, you can choose a difficulty. In Diablo 3, you have cheat deaths at all times. So hardcore works very differently there than it does in Diablo 4, where you have fixed difficulties besides on the Nightmare Dungeons, and you don't have cheat death, or barely any. I've been a long time hardcore enjoyer anyway, in Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. I've played hardcore quite a lot, but not entirely hardcore. So there were a lot of seasons where I also just played softcore only. And I started doing more and more hardcore content in the recent years, just to get in the habit of playing hardcore. I also started playing more hardcore in other games, for example, Path of Exile. So I did some leagues here and there where I just played hardcore, I did gauntlets, and all the kind of good stuff there. So it just helped me to prepare for this kind of like mindset that I have to be in for such a race. And when it comes to those long marathons, you might notice from my D3 times, usually on a season start, I would go pretty ham. I would do like my 30-hour stream or 35-hour stream or something like that for a race. And I would try to get world first or something like that for that season. And yeah, I kind of like got in the habit of doing that. So it wasn't really that crazy anymore once Diablo 4 launched, and I was able to also go 30 hours straight and then the next day like 20 hours again and so on, so that I could actually put as much time as possible into the game without actually ripping my character due to being overly tired or something like that. So not only did I try to prepare on the gaming side with the knowledge and my understanding of all the mechanics, but also physically and mentally. So I don't really do workout or something like that, so I'm not really in the best physical condition. But what I mentioned with those long streaming marathons, with trying to race for like 30 hours straight and staying awake and focused for those hours so I don't die with my character, is obviously pretty important. Over the seasons of doing this, I've also learned, for example, how my body reacts, how I can stay awake when I feel tired, and when is really the time to shut down and go to sleep, because I would lose focus. And also, of course, just in general, trying to stay somewhat healthy while doing this, like make sure to hydrate, make sure to eat enough and all that, which, yeah, I don't really do perfectly, but it's kind of okay. And then, of course, as the game's launch was slowly approaching, let's say the last half year or so, things intensified a lot with the preparations. So first of all, I moved to a different country. So I made that plan already like 2 years ago. I wanted to have good internet by the time I do the race to world first. So we couldn't find anything back in Greece, where I was living with my fiance, and we actually moved to Bulgaria now, where we have a nice fiber connection, so it's pretty nice. But we also had some issues there, like the previous apartment, we had lots of internet outages and lags and all that. So we moved a second time, actually, once in March and then once basically like 5 days before launch. just in time, where I have like a really nice stable connection now. It's a nice apartment, so can't really complain. So that was number one. The internet was a huge issue for the last 2.5 years for me, because I simply couldn't stream in good quality with a super stable connection, but now it's massively improved. And then number two was obviously preparing for the game itself. So in the last half year or so, back in December, I actually got access to the game in the press version, for example. We were able to play through the whole Fractured Peaks, basically the open beta version of the game. And we were able to start theorycrafting a lot. I was making builds, I was testing mechanics. So everything I could basically at that point already. Most of this was, or a lot of this was changed later in the open beta and in the server slam, especially when it comes to build balance and certain like tweaks in how skills work and all that. Then there was also all this information from Blizzard, from those blog posts, from the closed beta leaks and all that stuff. But generally, the more recent info has turned out to be a lot more viable than this old, outdated info, which kind of makes sense. The game has evolved a lot in the last 1, 2, 3 years. So as they started making those blogs, as we started seeing any kind of in-game content or screenshots or leaks, those definitely have changed quite a lot as well, it seems. And we had to kind of adapt on the fly. But, well, that's also kind of what I'm known for, I guess. I like to make my own builds. I like to make my own setups. In D3, I have done this like all the way ever since season 1. You might remember the ball lightning build. All the way back since Diablo 3 release, I was doing my own thing. I was doing my own builds. And then I had like this kind of like breakthrough in season 1 of this build, doing the world first at Greater Rift 45 back then. That kind of blew up my stream. Well, for back then standard, I guess. And this is how I actually started becoming a content creator. And I've been doing this for like almost 10 years now. So I knew that I was able to adapt to any kind of meta changes easily. I've played all of the classes many times. I've done many high-end pushes with all of the builds, basically. I knew that I had it in me to always adjust to whatever Blizzard throws at us. And this is very important for such a race, especially on a launch. You see that they have made all these hotfixes. Like every single day there was like some other hotfix, some other nerf, some other change to the game that you need to adapt to, even with perfect preparation. And of course, I was able to play the preview version like a week before launch, so I actually knew the game client and I had seen the regions and some dungeons and all that. I tried a bunch of builds on the rogue that I was mainly playing in that, but I only got to level 80, which, well, is not really that high after all. One thing I learned there though was that all of my theory crafting was basically exactly on point, so that was really good. So I had spent, especially the last 2 months or so before launch, theory crafting all the builds. You might have seen my builds on my Discord, where I have the Woody builds channel. So even though I knew that I was going to main rogue, I also started looking at what other classes do, what are the combos, what are the items that exist, how would you actually make a build work. Just to learn more about the game, get a better understanding, and of course also be a better content creator, so I can make guides for all classes. But I have to say that the best part about playing early access was actually the confirmation that all the stuff that I was theory crafting, all the knowledge I had gathered, was actually working out the way I thought it would. So especially like after playing the open beta and the server time a lot, trying out all of builds and all that, we only saw up to level 25, which is not all too much. But you can really like go from there with your theory crafts, and you can actually make viable endgame builds based on that knowledge. And then also those Paragon board planners started appearing later, so we were able to look at those. We were able to look at data mined uniques. We were able to look at what kind of stats can roll on items. So I tried to really soak up all that information, and I started spending a lot of time looking at all the information out there, understanding Paragon boards, you know, to the last detail, understanding all of the uniques, understanding which stats I want to roll on my items so that I can quickly sort them out during a race, so that I know what to go for so I don't rip my characters, understanding what are the efficient stats to roll, like what is a good damage stat versus what is a bad damage stat that could be replaced with something that helps the character better overall. So all these kind of things. And all that the press review access really did for me was confirming that I was generally on the right track with everything that I knew. The thing is, there were still a lot of unknowns. Obviously, this is a fresh game, this is a fresh release, it's a massive game that Blizzard has created here. There are tons of dungeons, tons of monsters, and situations you can find yourself in where you might not be prepared. You might rip your character accidentally because you didn't know a certain thing, because you didn't know how a monster reacts or what kind of ability they use. So of course, with just like a few days and leveling to 80, there was like no way to actually learn all of these things. And I have learned tons of new information about the game since it launched, since I actually went to level 100. And I guess that applies to everyone else as well. There's like so many things to see and learn. For example, I wasn't really sure how well my strategy would work out in general. Obviously, I had made a plan of how I want to progress through the game, which is kind of similar to the video I made recently about the 1 to 100 progression guide. So I kind of followed the same steps there. I didn't really know like how fast I would progress, for example, doing side quests versus dungeons versus nightmare dungeons versus farming PvP zone and all that stuff. So this was kind of things I needed to learn on the fly. I had a general idea that side quests are kind of weak and dungeons are generally kind of good. But then again, I didn't really know which dungeons. I didn't really know like how nightmare dungeons tie in there. And also you have to complete certain steps. You have to complete certain objectives like the renown, so that you can just focus on the one thing that gives you the most XP, even if you are racing to 100. And lastly, a huge unknown for me was how strong my character would actually be compared to the monsters. So for example, you have seen maybe some of my builds. I have usually put a lot of Dark Shroud into all of those builds, sometimes even ranked to level 5, just to add more survivability to rogues, because pre-launch I was expecting rogues to be generally relatively squishy. They are the super fast, more moving, agile class, so they're not really supposed to be tanky. And so I tried to put in some kind of survivability in all of those builds, especially via Dark Shroud. But when I was actually playing the game, I decided that I need to go faster. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I went with dash usually, especially after campaign. So for campaign, I was learning Dark Shroud because it was more slow paced. There were a lot of bosses there, and it was kind of hard to judge like how well I can handle those bosses. So I did the safe route, but I was still trying to be fast. But then basically post campaign, I dropped Dark Shroud basically entirely. And I went with dash instead, just to speed up my pace. I got a ton of questions about that. Why did I do that? And well, the answer is because I can. So I just realized that I was tanky enough, especially with a bunch of good gear, especially with outplaying monsters properly, which is like the one thing that you need to do as a rogue. You were able to survive just fine for the most part. I did have some extremely close calls, of course, on my way to the 100. You might have seen some of those clips, but I also have some more uploads coming, so stay tuned for those. And yeah, there were definitely the possibilities to rip very easily with some really unexpected burst damage because I didn't have Dark Shroud. So it was a risky move, but I think it paid off in the end because I actually managed to pick up the pace, go faster than anyone else. Another factor that led me to try to speed up my progression as much as possible was that I knew that group play is massively more powerful than solo play in Diablo 4, and I still wanted to be the first to be level 100. Now, I was obviously beaten by at least one team. So Scissoran, Steel, Karn, and Nugian, some big PoE blasters. They teamed up together and they actually overtook me right at the end. So as far as I know, I was the first in the world to reach level 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, and also ton of difficulty on hardcore. But then, like close to the end, at like level 92 or so, the groups just overtook me because they were farming XP like 3 times faster than a solo player could, with resetting dungeons and split farming, which is, yeah, you just clear stuff like 4 times faster, basically. So there was like no way to catch up to that anymore at some point. Because even the last 10 levels or so, they were like a full day's grind, like a 20-hour grind almost or so. So they had ample opportunity to catch up and overtake. But it didn't really matter to me. First of all, I was the guy who helped that team accomplish this, because I actually sat down with them for like 2 hours, talking about the group strategies, talking about any kind of like synergies they can try to create to help them out and get the first. Scissoran had reached out to me to do some kind of like podcast style. I've actually uploaded that on my YouTube a few days ago, if you want to watch that. So I just talked through everything that could help them. And personally, I quite enjoyed that. I think that especially in Diablo 3, we had way too little competition, especially on like this hardcore side of things, especially with like a race to world first. There was usually not that much going on, and I felt relatively lonely there sometimes. And I was very glad to see that some of the PoE boys were coming in to play Diablo 4, to try something like this. So I wanted to help them out and have the race be not so much about like knowledge advantage, but more about the actual gameplay execution advantage, so to say. So despite knowing that there's almost zero chance of a solo player winning the race, I wanted to try anyway. And when it comes to the solo competition, I think I was like miles ahead of anyone else. So it was actually pretty crazy. I think the next guy was actually Al Kaiser, who's like also one of the biggest ARPG blasters out there. You might know him from early D3 or from PoE. He's like one of the best players. And he was doing a really good job on his barb. But I was like 10 levels ahead of the next guy, basically, on the solo race. I also felt it was kind of interesting that I was basically the only rogue out there, at least on the top end. So I didn't really see like most people doing rogue. I saw a lot of barbs, I saw some sorks and some druids. And then, well, necromancer obviously being a relatively slow class, probably would not be like a racing choice here. But I was very surprised to see that almost no one picked rogue for the race. I did it because it's my main class, as I described earlier. I had decided I will go rogue like years ago, but after seeing how good it was in, you know, the betas and how fast it can go with dash and shadow step and these kind of things, yeah, kind of strange to me. And for the way that I actually managed to get to level 100, I had like a very specific strategy in mind. So as I mentioned, I had made my progression guide 1 to 100, and I followed pretty much that. So first of all, you have to do the campaign. And I started out on adventurer difficulty because it's faster and easier. You can have an easy time against those bosses. Not because I was scared that I would die to an Act 1 or Act 2 campaign boss or something like that. But it was just the more efficient route to take. But I did switch to veteran difficulty at some points. So sometimes I got like some big upgrades. For example, once I unlocked the Blade Dancer aspect for twisting blades, which is very important. Or when I had my inner sight specialization, I did run on veteran for a while to get more XP faster. On the way through the campaign, I went all throughout the zones and actually completed 1 or 2 renown objectives. So I got the 1 extra skill point or an extra potion slot as well. So I had a bit of extra power acquired already as I was going through the campaign, so that I would have an easier time leveling through the last stages. I actually did manage to beat Lilith, I think with level 38. So I was underleveled by 7 levels. I think she's 45. So I was there quite early and I couldn't quite go nightmare difficulty just yet. It was a bit scary being so underleveled on a hardcore. So I did like a little bit more leveling, like up to like 40 or something. And then I went for the first capstone dungeon. The first capstone dungeon is relatively easy, luckily. And then I was in nightmare difficulty and I was able to acquire those sacred items. So my goal was for this first session, for the first stream that I was doing, I wanted to reach torment difficulty. And I want to be done with all the renown. So basically, as soon as I entered nightmare difficulty, I started working on the renown. I went around, did strongholds because I got the extra XP bonus, and I was able to complete them relatively easily, even relatively underleveled. And then I started doing side quests. I started exploring, getting waypoints, getting my altars of Lilith. I actually collected them all in like a few hours as I was going around the entire sanctuary map and collecting all the other things. So I wanted to get all of that out of the way. And despite this being a race, I felt it was very important to actually focus on those side objectives, get the extra power, because I figured it would help me on the later stages of the grind, where monsters just scale higher and higher, and you kind of expected to have this renown, extra power from skill points, from paragon points. But if you don't have them, it might be pretty tough to actually do the last stretch, like the last levels from like, let's say 90 to 100, for example. So from like level 45 to 65 or so, I managed to complete all of the renown in all of the regions, just going around. I did not do this as effectively as I could. I was focusing a bit too much on side quests, which are generally kind of unrewarding in terms of XP and generally kind of slow, unless you find exactly the right ones that are pretty fast. So I should have definitely done a few more of those dungeons and make sure that I do fewer of those quests. But I got all the strongholds done, all the waypoints, all the altars, most of the exploration, and that already carries you most of the way there to the renown objectives. And then around level 63, I was like in the lead by, I don't know, 5-6 levels or so of the next guy, I believe, at that point, including the group blasters. So I decided to pick up the pace even further after being relatively slow in nightmare difficulty and try to unlock torment difficulty. So I went for the capstone dungeon and popped my first elixir of death evasion, had my scroll of escape ready, but nothing of that actually needed to be used. And I was actually able to defeat Elias in the capstone dungeon and unlock torment. So that was a huge step, and this was like close to the end of the first day. So this was like 25 hours in or something like that when I had it unlocked, and I was good to go for torment blasting. At that point, I had not touched any nightmare dungeons whatsoever yet, so my glyphs were all level 1. and I was feeling not really too powerful and too comfortable going into Torment difficulty. So I was doing this very carefully. I actually changed my setup from like this death trap build to a bit more slow pace. I used poison imbuement, I dropped the dash, and I was trying to like kind of like carefully do some events, do some side quests, do like some easy content basically in Torment difficulty so that I could get this ancestral loot. And things started improving quite a lot really fast because those ancestral items are massively more powerful, and I was able to get to like level 65, level 66, etc. quite comfortably after another hour or two. And at that point I swapped back from this kind of slow pace safe setup to this blaster setup with death trap and dash and all that, so I could pick up the pace again because I was not so underleveled and undergeared anymore. The late game strategy for me was to farm nightmare dungeons as much as possible and as fast as possible, so I tried to actually gear up quite a lot. I actually did a lot of Helltide as well, especially during Stormwind difficulty. So once I was like level 70 plus, here and there the Helltide would pop up and I would go there to try to get some Forgotten Souls. I wasn't really going there for gearing up, like opening those chests and so. I just wanted Forgotten Souls so I can roll the items I found. So I put a really large focus on getting good loot, on sorting out my loot, especially in the early levels of Torment difficulty where you get ancestral items, because I knew these will be the items that carry me to 100. And I knew that I had dropped Dark Shroud for dash, so I was relatively squishy, and I needed to keep fights short. So I tried to get really high DPS and also boost my survivability through items alone. So I was looking for all slots, all items with really good stats, and I was actually paying a lot of attention to what dropped. So while it may technically be faster to leave a lot of the loot on the ground later because upgrades might be minuscule or just like so rare that it's not really worth sorting out items for like, an hour basically if you combine the time that you spend at the blacksmith. So I had to kind of like weigh like the state of my gear and my progression versus the time I would waste standing at the blacksmith and salvaging my loot. So yeah, I was kind of like paying less and less attention to items as I went, and I was focusing more on just like insta selling everything or most of the things that didn't look really great on first glance. But at least early on in Torment difficulty, paying a lot of attention to the item drops was quite important and very helpful. And finally, for the last push from level 92 on 100, this was the last day, this was day 4, right before the early access launch was over and the real launch happened. I changed my setup again a little bit. So I grinded from like 65 plus to around 92 with mostly nightmare dungeons, a bit of Helltide in between. And then at that point I skipped everything that was not like really high, really juicy nightmare dungeons. So I was more aggressive with salvaging my sigils of dungeons I didn't want to run. I was more aggressive with running the dungeons I wanted to run, even though they had bad affixes. And I started popping those potions, like the good ones, the crit potions, the attack speed potions, and also some elixirs of death evasion, so I can actually go to really high nightmare dungeons. I was farming some dungeons where monsters were like 8 levels, 10 levels above me, even with dangerous affixes. I was just YOLOing it, trying to pick up the pace as much as possible and finish this last day's grind as fast as possible as well. I had a slight glimmer of hope that maybe the team that was ahead of me would rip or something, or maybe at least 1 or 2 of the members would rip and they would be kind of crippled there and I could try to catch up. But for the most part, I knew that the race was over in terms of world first overall, but at least I could be the world first 100. And I wanted to try to be it as fast as possible. Even though at that point I was so far ahead of the solo hardcore competition, at least like a day ahead of the next guy or so, that there was basically no reason to take any risks. I could just like smooth sail into the finish line. I wanted to beat my own personal challenge of finishing the level 100 before early access is over. And in the end, I managed to do so with 15 minutes left. So after this insane 96 hours of grind with very little sleep, I slept like 4 or 5 hours a day. And I grinded a total of like around 77.7 hours to beat level 100. So I'm not sure exactly about the plus minus exact minute, but it was a funny number. And after rushing through those nightmare dungeons like a madman the entire day from 92 to 99.9, I started the final dungeon. And well, the hype was real. A lot of people were there. And we celebrated this moment together when I finally dinked 100. And man, that was a really good feeling. I knew I wasn't the first. I knew that, I had a little advantage with the Path of Exile and all that stuff. And realistically, there will be a ton more races in the future. There will be the Season 1 race, there will be the Season 2 race, there will be community races in between. You know, we're gonna do this for years, and I'm gonna be there to race every single time. But in the end, actually accomplishing this level 100, especially with this super tough pace I was trying to keep all the time, trying to go as fast as possible, it was a really good feeling knowing I had actually made it, knowing that I dodged the bullet a few times when those really tight, almost rips. And I had so much fun doing it all the way. And I knew that a lot of guys also enjoyed it on the live stream. So I haven't been able to upload a lot of clips yet, but I have a few things. But on the live stream, things were going crazy, and especially in that moment, yeah, everyone started going crazy. And I want to say again, like, a really huge thank you to everyone who was there, just cheering on, or, you know, supporting, gifting subs or whatever. It helped a ton, and it also kept me motivated. It kept me focused on the grind, and had kind of like this feeling that there was a purpose behind of this, besides just my own personal goal. And I do have to say that the game actually turned out so enjoyable for me. I really like the game, so this is definitely something I'm going to be blasting for a long, long time, I know already. And especially once those updates are coming in, once the endgame gets even more rich and all that stuff, I think it's going to be great to just, you know, come back over and over, level other characters, try new challenges, and just have a ton of fun. So I'll be there for you. I kind of pity the group players there a little bit that got to experience the full game in the way that it did for the first time. So you might be aware that the group players were doing this like reset dungeon strategy, and I've seen this a little bit, I've watched a little bit, and I was looking at what they do, and man, it seemed atrociously boring, both for the players and for the viewers. And I'm very happy that I actually got to experience a little bit of a variety of content. I was doing those nightmare dungeons, I was doing Hell Tides, I was doing the PvP zone a lot as well. The PvP zone was quite valuable as well, because I was by far basically the strongest guy out there, that I had no worries running around in the PvP zone, because anyone who would try to gank me would probably just be ripped apart. So that was a really nice thing to the farm as well for a solo player. And yeah, some of these like other dungeon grinds. But compared to the group players that were just doing the same dungeons over and over, you know, not really progressing, not picking up loot, not getting glyph levels, just for XP, yeah, no thank you. So I'm quite glad I didn't do anything of that, and I had a ton of fun exploring almost all of the content that the game already has. So there was a lot of variety in what I was doing, and I was finding this certain like route basically, but there was always like something new, and with those nightmare dungeons mixed in, the runs just were more exciting, and really what the game should be about. Now, a lot of people said that this group stuff was like an exploit or so, and this should not be in the game. Yeah, I kind of agree this should not be in the game. I don't agree it's an exploit. This is just how the game works. We knew this beforehand. We had testing phases. I made a video about all of this stuff before the release. You know, the information was out there, and the devs could fix it. The devs should fix it, actually, I would say. It's not really a matter that is healthy for the game. And as I mentioned, I think no one actually really enjoyed doing this group meta strategy with resetting dungeons. So there definitely needs to be some tweaks here. The zone-wide XP needs to go. The dungeon resetting maybe has to go. So there are a lot of things that are kind of bad here when it comes to racing to 100. There should simply be more of an incentive to do a variety of content and stay in a game for longer sessions, and not break the immersion and not break the flow of the game all the time through loading screens and resetting and all this kind of stuff. Even as a solo player, I know that some people were doing this. For example, the Morgan's Works dungeon that actually got nerfed after a few days, and people were farming that. And that would have been a faster strategy for myself as well, because I was able to do this dungeon very effectively, very fast, and it was very juicy with big monster packs. But I just couldn't be bothered. Like, I did it here and there when I was around the area, kind of. So I kind of like did a run or two, but for the most part, I was doing a lot of variety content, and it was a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable. And there should never be this incentive to farm the same dungeon over and over and relog to reset it and all that stuff. I think what the game would need long term could be something like the Nephilim Vader buff from early Diablo 3, where you stay in the game, for example, after defeating elites, you get like a stacking buff that gives you a bit more XP, a bit more magic find or something like that. So that, yeah, it's just like a really good way of preventing these kind of like farming strategies that are basically Diablo 2 pindle runs. So much for that. In any case, I'm very glad that everything worked out the way that it did, despite handicapping myself with no group play, with no trading, and with not even running the best solo strategy on top of that, it was a lot of fun, and it was like definitely one of the coolest grinds I have done in any game so far. I'm really excited to race again, especially once this is on a more even playing field with, you know, everyone having access to the game now, and then Season 1 comes around, we're gonna have new meta, we're gonna have new stuff to explore, and everyone will have seen the game, everyone will, you know, share the knowledge, and it's gonna be a lot of fun to see what are gonna be the big races in the future. I also want to say a final thank you here for my biggest supporters, for everyone who was there on Twitch, for my mods that helped me try to keep things under control in the last weeks already. Everything has been super crazy, both on Discord, on Twitch. I have a lot of viewers, a lot of people. So thanks for helping me out there. Also a special thank you to my brother, who originally, like 8 years ago, actually told me about Twitch and that platform, like back in like early Reaper of Souls. And he was saying like, hey, maybe you should try to stream. You're playing really well on your Demon Hunter. And well, 8 years later, here we are. I would have never thought about doing anything like that. I never imagined myself being a content creator or a streamer or something like that. I was going to university, but well, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. So I'm glad that you guys make it possible. And of course, a final thank you to Nini, my fiance, who just helped me all the way throughout, who supports me in many ways, and who also kept me alive through this insane race. She's simply the best, very understanding and supportive of my goals, and I'm really glad to have her. And that's it for what I have to share here. I hope you enjoyed my story time. It was quite long now, but I figured there was a lot of things to talk about that are also outside of the game, you know, how I prepared, how everything went, and I hope that you enjoyed the ride. Of course, I can't upload the entire like 1 to 100 progression or something like that on YouTube. That would be pretty ridiculous. But yeah, a lot of you guys were there on the live stream, I guess. Also, I do have my Twitch VODs where you can watch the live streams if you want to. See how I did it and when and what. And of course, I'm gonna have a lot more stuff to share here. I'm gonna have a lot of guides, a lot more characters to make. I'm gonna play all of the classes many, many times. And I'm gonna be around. So I hope you enjoyed this, and see you guys next time.